Hello everyone and welcome back to Trainz. This is going to be a quick little tutorial on how to set up an ATLS crossing. This is actually the second video I've done on ATLS crossings. We first set up this crossing over here in a previous video, but once I recorded that, the audio, basically the audio became unusable due to the computer's microphone. So I'm going to re-record. If you want to watch the video where we created this crossing right here, I'll link it in the description, but I will warn you the audio is very messed up. So for this one, I'm going to do this crossing right over here next to the gas station and this store, leading towards a grain silo on the south edge of town. This, of course, is the Barclay Super Granary layout, which is steadily getting improved. So the first thing we need to create a crossing is some crossing grade, I guess is what it's called. So I'm just going to lay that out, and don't worry about it not covering the road at the moment. We'll take care of that in a second. So that outlines your crossing portion where the cars will breeze over the tracks really easily. Okay, so for the ATLS system, you're going to need to download all of the objects are on the download station. And here is what you are going to need. Let's narrow this down by ATLS. You're going to go into the filter here, and so you are going to need a ATLS controller. You will need a ATLS slave, which is that piece right there, and you will also need the ATLS traffic stopper. Those are all in the objects section. You will also need the ATLS trigger, which can be found in the triggers section. And that's what you need at minimum to do these ATLS crossings. So the first thing you're going to need to do is define where your stoppage point is going to be. Now, on most dual track crossings, you will need to put basically a stopper on one side of the track and a stopper on the other side of the track. But for single track crossings, the range of the stopper is large enough to just take the track itself. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, at that point, you're going to go into your road splines, and you are going to basically cut away a portion of the road. And then you will move the road to the splines joints that are perpendicular to the railroad track, and it will dip down like this. That is normal. Then you're going to go back to the objects. You're going to go to raise objects, and while holding down the shift or control key, just kind of fine-tune the height. I find with the yarn roads that right around 0.25 to 0.4 is about the perfect height, and you can always zoom in and kind of take a look. You know, that's a bit of a crest. Why don't we do 3? No. 2? How about 2.25? 3? We'll go with 2.5 because that makes it go across the sidewalks nicely. Even though it leaves quite a big bump here in the track, which is a bit unfortunate. Now, it is crucial to note that you do not want to connect your railroad tracks to the spline. That makes things end very badly. I also noticed that our track, or our rubber grade crossing, is not quite aligned, so we'll just drag that over and make it look nice and good. Slide that like that, and slide that like so. I don't see any separation, so that looks great. Alright, so the next thing you want to do is you're going to need a slave, and you just put the slave wherever you want. It doesn't matter the direction, it doesn't matter where you put it, as long as you don't connect the track to it. And what the slave does is it essentially creates an invisible train that will trigger all the crossings and anything connected to the slave. You don't want to put these on actual track because it does create an invisible train there. So there is an actual physical entity, and if it is present, any train that comes by will actually run into it, and it will break or attach to the train and just mess everything up, and we don't want to do that. So I'll just slide that off to the side here. You will also need a ATLS controller, which is that thing. Okay, Now you just need to pick your favorite lights that you want, and we're just going to type in grade NRC. All these grade crossings are BNSF 50. That is the author who made these, and they are some phenomenal crossings. So we're kind of in this older type area. So I was thinking of using like an older sort of signal, or maybe, maybe we could modernize it a little bit. Well, that looks fine. We'll do that. We'll modernize it. We'll say that there's some old crossings that they had to take down, so we'll put in a modern stack here. That sounds good. So then we just need to make sure that the crossing is perpendicular to the road and that it will actually function. There we go. That looks good. And sometimes you can tell if they're going to be wide enough if you just quickly gaze down from the top. That looks fine. Just slide that over there, and we'll slide this one over to match a bit. Okay. So now what do? You need to connect everything together. So let's see. For this, you can use... My preference is to use the invisible wire because it's not as ridiculous as the track eraser, which I will show you here. Track eraser. I mean, the track eraser is invisible. It's completely invisible track. You won't see this when we go into the game. So, as you can see, it's big. So, when you're just getting into this, it can be very useful. But I prefer to use the invisible wire just because it's... Oops, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to delete. I usually use the invisible wire just because it's not as visible, I guess, for lack of a better term. It looks fairly neat. So what you're going to do is you're going to run wire between all of these connections. So we just did the slave to the crossing gate to the stopper to the other crossing gate. Now, this circuit is technically complete. It will stop, or this will trigger everything, and cars will stop at this crossing. But I like to complete these circuits for redundancy, just in case, something silly happened and doesn't want to transfer the signal. So it's good to do that. So what we want to do now is we need to place some triggers. So I'm trying to remember again. I think the Federal Railroad Administration has a 15-second mandate for when trains reach the crossing. And because of the intricacies of over here, the crossing speed limit, the speed limit of the rails here is going to be about 10-15 miles an hour. So, we need to figure out the math really quickly, and of course I'm doing math on the fly, which is never going to be fast, to figure out how far we need to go. Let's see, so we'll do 15 miles an hour, divide that by, that's not right, 15 miles an hour. Yeah, no, we divide that by 60, divide that by 60 again, that gives us miles per second. Yeah, that's right. 60. Yeah, that's correct. And then we multiply that by 5,280 because the ruler deals in feet, so that's 22 feet per second. Multiply that by 15 equals 300 feet. So, it's about 300 feet is what our goal is. So we're going to put this to scale. We're going to come over here and use this ruler tool. I'm not sure why that's showing up. Hang on one moment. Okay, sorry about that. The windows began overlapping and some random stuff came up. So, we're back. Where were we? Oh, yes, measuring out about 300 feet. So, let's see, 5, 800, 200. There we go, approximately 300 feet. This is a 15 mile an hour rail, isn't it? Let me see. I thought I put a sign in here somewhere. Oh, it's 10. Okay. It's a 10 mile an hour rail. So let me redo my calculations really quick because it's been a little while since I worked on this. So let's redo that calculation. 10 miles an hour divided by 3,600 gives us 0.002 times 5,280 is 14. Multiply that by, let's say, 15 seconds. That's 220 feet. So that makes a world of difference. So let's move this to, come on. Come on. Okay, why isn't this cooperating? Hold on one moment. Alrighty. Okay, why is this not working? There we go. Gonna add a ruler, 220 feet. Is pretty much here. We're gonna do ATLS trigger. What the hell? Okay. Sorry guys, my computer is just freaking out. Okay, so there's an ATLS trigger. We're going to put it right there. And then we are going to measure the same distance out the other side. Come on. I don't know why it won't let me move the ruler, so I guess I'm just going to delete and add. Okay, and 220 feet. Place another trigger. Okay. So that should be a 15-second run-up at 10 miles an hour, which is what Federal Railroad Administration is the minimum as far as between crossing activation and the gates being down and the train getting to the crossing. Okay, so there's a few things we need to edit really importantly. We're going to go to the triggers. Excuse me. And we need to go to the actual triggers tab. You'll notice that the ATLS trigger is actually in the signals box. And I'm not really sure why that is, but what you need to do is you need to go over here to the track marker box, and you need to go down to the advanced, and we are going to do a 1 meter radius around this point. So put a 1 here, click on the thing to trigger that to a 1 meter radius. And so essentially what this does is it puts a range around that fixed point that says when a train enters this range, I am going to trigger. And I'll use this one as an example. In fact, let me use the one next to it too. So this trigger right here is set to a 20 meter trigger. That means when a train comes and hits this range right here, it's going to trip the crossing. And that in general isn't going to hurt anything. But if you have another trigger right by it, like here, for example, if we put this out to the 20 meter, and this one isn't quite touching, but it actually shows my point over here. Basically, if a train gets in this range, it will trip the trigger. And with this one right here, we can see that this range does overlap another track. Now, in this case, it is going to go to that crossing, which isn't too big of a deal with the exception of this trigger being right here. So actually what would happen with this crossing is the crossing will activate here, and then it will enter this zone and deactivate itself, which is no good. We don't want that. So I try to place my triggers at the actual points that I want the train to trip the crossing, and then I reduce the range to like 1 meter just so that it's got a little bit of play. And so then the train trips the trigger and everything works as I have it set up in my head. Okay, so we have one last step, actually a couple last steps, but they're not that hard. What we need to do is go to your objects menu, hit the question mark. You're going to click on the controller, and the game's going to load for a little bit because I forgot to preload the query menu before I started, and for some reason on the first go around it takes a long time to load. There it is. Okay, so you're given this menu when you click on the object properties of the controller. And you can sort of think of these ATLS systems as a remote control car, or just any sort of radio controlled device. They work off of frequencies and channels. And you can use these to set different crossings and set different triggers and a whole bunch of neat stuff. So this is the controller menu. So when you enter this, you're going to click the plus sign on the channel. So it's going to start it off, and when you click plus, it will go to the first available channel. If you click minus, it goes back. If you click plus, now you can set this to any channel that you want. It goes from 1 to, I don't even know how high it goes. I've been up to 999 just for grins and giggles, and it was still doing stuff. So you could put a lot of things in your layout. So this assigns this controller to channel number 4. Now, this route phase is important. The ATLS system can not only be used for rail crossings, you can also use it to make your own custom traffic lights and intersections. If you're a really hardcore modeler, you can model each and every intersection in your town, make it have lights that turn, left turn signals, right turn signals, flashing lights, what have you. Most of the time I just use it for intersections that are directly affected by rails. And in this town we're actually going to have a couple of those, but I'm not showing that to you in this video. This is just a basic tutorial. So when you click the plus sign and it adds 2 routes, this is what you'd use to set up like a traffic intersection. Generally when you have 2 routes, you have 2 phases. On one phase, one is green, one is red. On the second phase, the first one is red and the second one is green. Simple, basic, and you can add as many phases as you want. And the special stuff triggers for like trains and things, but that's not a topic for this tutorial. That's for a more complicated one. So for level crossings, you're going to hit the minus sign again, which will set it to -1 level crossing mode selected. So this is just to trip crossings. That's all it will do. And all of these assets have like a detailed description here that illustrate many of the points that I just said, so I won't bore you too much. So that's set to channel 4, remember that, and click the check mark. Now you're going to do the same object properties on the slave, and you are going to set this to channel number 4, or you can just click on the channel, enter 4, and hit enter, and it will set it to 4. This is very useful when you have a lot of them, because you can just come in here and enter in like channel 69, and boom, it's set to that channel. Again, this is your route controller. You can set the traffic stop or the slave to control certain routes. So, set it to route 1, route 2. So what we're going to do is, like with the controller, we're going to set this to -1, which is level crossing mode. So you just come in, hit the minus sign. Again, this also has a whole tutorial and thing in there for you to read. Click the check mark. We're not quite done. Next, you need to go back to the signal tab here, click the question mark, and you're going to click on your newly placed trigger, and you need to match these settings as well. So you're going to hit 4, hit OK, and this one we will also set to 4. Now before I close out of this one, this is something you are going to need to know with this system. There are 2 types of trigger systems within the ATLS assets. The 1 or 2-way running, and then the 2-way running 4 triggers. I'm just going to call them the 2 trigger and the 4 trigger system. So the 2 trigger system is very, very basic. You have point A and you have point B. If your train is in between points A and B, assuming it doesn't start in between them, it passes through, the crossing will be triggered, and it will be triggered until the last car leaves point B. It's very, very simple and very, very useful for, rural routes, small town yards, and things where you don't mind people sitting at intersections for a little while after the train has passed. If you're building a more modern type route, I guess, with more modern crossings, you will use the 4 trigger system. And essentially what the 4 trigger system will do is you set up 2 triggers before the crossing. Here, I'll just do one as an example. So you've got that trigger here, and you would actually place two more triggers, one here and one here. So what will happen is the train will mosey on down. It will trip this trigger, initiating the crossing. It will pass over the second trigger, which will do nothing. And then it will pass over this trigger. When the final car passes over this trigger, the crossing will deactivate. And then the fourth trigger, which is down here, it won't do anything. So essentially what it does is it causes the crossing to deactivate as soon as your train goes over it, which is useful for high traffic lines, big road intersections where they can't have people waiting for a long period of time. It generally makes a more realistic scene. The problem with the four-way system is if you have a train that, say, comes in and stops across the crossing and then reverses out, it is prone to issues when you do that. So for this town, since we have a lot of sidings, and that's mainly what the train traffic in this town is going to be, I'm just going to keep it simple with the two-way system. And again, you will need to activate the channels. You'll have to make sure that the triggers are set correctly. And again, this tutorial, there's versions of all this within the help menu here. So that's pretty much all you need to do to set up an ATLS crossing. It's much simpler than I'm probably making it sound, but that's just because I wanted to fill you in with how the entire system works. So I'm going to show you this in action with a train we have on the layout, and this will also verify that I did this correctly. So I'm going to fire up the actual game, and I'll see you on board. Okay, so we are actually in game now. We have this lovely BNSF GP38 right outside the Max Donuts facility, and it is going to be delivering this load of covered hoppers to the silos that were on that side of town. So we are going to get this train moving, and we are going to jet over to the new crossing that we just built, and you'll see the ATLS system in action. So let's get them moving. Okay, so as we bounce over here, you're actually going to see this crossing activate as well. Flip the switch. You're going to see this crossing activate as well, and you'll probably hear it as we have the train coming over here. But this is the crossing we just set up. I should have marked where the triggers are. The first trigger should be somewhere in this general vicinity if my cursor is on. It is basically right here. So I'll set the panorama over here. You can see the train has reached the first crossing. I can actually speed this up a little bit. There we go. Get it up to the actual speed limit. Oops, we're going too fast. Okay, so there it goes. The crossing has activated. The gates will come down. And the cars should stop if any actually show up. Here comes one. It should stop right before the crossing. And it does. Pan over here and take a quick look. Perfect. Our gates are positioned correctly. And if we pan around, the other trigger should be somewhere over here, and that will deactivate the crossing. Okay, that other gate's in a good position. And the crossing deactivates and the cars are set free. So that's the basics of setting up an ATLS crossing here on the Barclay Super Granary layout. Stay tuned for more videos of the Barclay Super Granary. It's one of like 3 or 4 routes that I'm just casually working on. There's no schedule to it or anything like that. So, you know, just keep an ear open or an eye open, whatever, about updates to this. It will be progressing both on camera and off camera. So hopefully you enjoyed the tutorial and got some use out of it. And thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.